DND number 6, The Worth of Souls in Jesus' Name. Chapter 9. Eric hung up the phone and went straight to his wife. She'll be okay. Trust God. The FBI will be there soon. Jason's getting his company jet ready. Well, I'm coming with you. I'd expect nothing less. Go upstairs and grab what you need. He turned to the 3 other men in the room. Jeff and Joey, Jason wants you on the jet. Mark, I'm going to have to ask you to stay here and take care of Mickey. However I can help the most, Mark answered. Besides, I've got little Joey. Good, and please call Ricky and Bree and let them know what's happening. Jeff ran up the stairs to see to Mickey. He found her sitting on the floor near the bed, her knees drawn up to her chin. He knelt beside her. Mickey, we'll get Jeffy back. Everything is going to be okay. You keep saying that, but how do you know, Jeff? How? If he harms her, what then? And she said Marissa's hurt. How bad? I've got to get up there. Oh, no. You're staying right here where you're safe. Like hell I am. We're leaving on Jason's jet as soon as we can get to the airstrip, and you will stay here with Mark and little Joey. I don't know where you get off telling me what I can and can't do. Jeff scowled. Well, it was fine as long as you needed me to protect you, now wasn't it? Now that you're feeling a little more secure, all of a sudden, you think you know best? Mickey's mouth dropped open. She screamed at him, calling him a list of pointed and insulting obscenities. Jeff sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Yeah, I guess I am. Bottom line, you're staying here where you'll be safe. I have no idea what's going to happen, and I need to be able to help find Jeffy without having to worry about you. I'm not asking you to worry about me, and I am coming with you. Jeff's face went blank. No, you're not, and this discussion is over. Mickey stood, her body trembling. Don't you dare tell me when a discussion is over. I'm going with you. I have to go. You are most definitely not going with me, and unless you think you're brave enough to venture out alone, you will stay here. He stopped and sighed at the wide-eyed expression on her face. It's for your own good, Mickey. How in the world did you suddenly become an authority on what's best for me? She shrieked. I think you're reading way too much into our relationship. His eyes narrowed as he realized what she was saying. Maybe. So, let's put our relationship in this area. I certainly know what's best. You've been through a severe trauma. You're not thinking clearly. The tears came and she tried to choke them back. Jeff, you don't understand. It's my fault. Even if it was your fault, that's not reason enough for you to come out of hiding. You stay here until we make a move on Daly. Her chin trembled and Jeff blew out a breath. Look, Mick, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to pull off some sort of male domination kind of thing. I'm supposed to be keeping you safe. Yet you're leaving. Yes, however, I'm leaving you with Mark. Is he a trained agent too? No, but he's just as good as one because he's Grandmaster Keno's stepson. He's been trained by the people who trained me. Now, I don't have time to discuss this any further. Good. Then stop arguing with me. We need to get ready to go. Damn it, Mickey, I can't hash this out with you right now. You're just going to have to trust me. Please. I need to know that you're here and safe. I'll call you the moment I know something. You're just like all the other men I've ever known, pushy and bossy and unreasonable. You're comparing me to your stepfather? Jeff asked incredulously. I didn't say that. You didn't have to, Mick. She turned her back on him. Well, maybe I've made a mistake. The words were spoken softly, yet Jeff heard them loud and clear. Maybe his job just wasn't conducive to happy relationships, or maybe it was him. Whatever it was, he didn't have the luxury of sticking around and talking it out. I have to get ready. I don't want to delay them. They're worried enough as it is. When I get back, I hope we can talk this through. He moved close and tried to hug her, but she stepped away. Sighing, he stood. Fine, if that's the way you want it. He stormed to his room down the hall, and she followed him, thinking to continue their argument. She watched him gather a bag with a few clothes and personal items, and mostly weapons, and it seemed as if she'd seen him do that exact thing hundreds of times now. Strap on a holster, check his gun, unsheath and resheath the knife. He was a professional, and of course, he knew what was best. Usually, however, not in this case. He started for the door and stopped and looked at her. She looked away. When she looked back, he was gone. New scene. Marissa didn't know what to do. They were parked in the mall parking lot. Marissa had refused to get out of the car. Her mother and Miss Doris stood just outside in the front of the car, having a private conversation, probably trying to figure out what they were going to do with her. Then she did what she always did when she didn't know what to do. She called Cameron. "Where are you?" she asked. "I'm down the street waiting on Jeffy. I saw you leave with your mother. What's taking Jeffy so long, and why aren't you with her?" "My father caught her," Marissa sobbed. "He forced my mother to take me away from the house. He said he was going to have a word with Jeffy and then take her home." "Well, we both know that's not going to happen unless Jeffy makes him believe that she lives nearby and he actually lets her go." "I have a very bad feeling about this," Marissa said. "A black Buick just pulled into your drive. Isn't that Kurt's wheels?" "Yes." "Oh my gosh, Cameron, I don't know what will happen to her." "Marissa, I won't let her out of my sight. I'll follow behind him. I won't let him hurt her. You need to try to contact her parents and your friends at the FBI. Call them. Hurry, Marissa. Jeffy could be in big trouble, and if he would kill his own daughter, he'd hurt Jeffy without blinking an eye." "Do you think so? I don't think he's stupid enough to hurt someone from a famous family." "Marissa, he doesn't know who she is, remember? He thinks she's some kid from the wrong side of the tracks. Just call the FBI and her parents. I'll try to keep you posted. I promise I won't let her out of my sight." Marissa didn't have the business card Agent Dodge had given her to call if she needed him, so she dialed information and asked for the number. Hand shaking, she punched in the number. She explained to the woman who answered that she needed to reach Agent Dodge, that it was an emergency, and she'd lost the card he'd given her. The woman asked her to wait while she patched her through, and while she waited, she silently begged him to answer, but it went to message. "Ugh," she grunted, slamming her phone down. New scene. Jeffy looked up when Mr. Daly opened the door of the room. Her face paled as she looked into the barrel of a gun. "You're going for a little ride," he said. He stepped aside, and a tall man, dressed in an expensively tailored suit, walked into the room. The man wasted no time. He moved quickly, grabbed her wrist, twisted it behind her back, and ushered her through the kitchen and into the garage. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice from shaking. The man stopped mid-stride, turned her toward him, and struck her across the face. "Shut up. I'll be asking the questions." Still holding her wrist, he opened the trunk of a dark sedan. Jeffy's eyes grew wide as saucers. The man leaned her against the side of the car and ran his hands over her body, taking extra time to check around her breasts, and she gave thanks that she'd put the phone in her sock and not her bra. He moved close to her and whispered in her ear, "You're not really a kid, are you? Who do you work for?" Jeffy's body began to tremble. I don't work for anyone." "How old are you really?" Jeffy began to cry. She'd give anything to have her father walk up right now. "I'm only 15, really. I'm 15. I swear." Suddenly he moved away. "Shut up your whining. Just get in the trunk," he ordered gruffly, pushing her forward. She readily complied, happy to put space between herself and him. She climbed in and lay on her side, atop a thin green comforter that was spread out across the space. "On your back," he said. She obeyed. He grabbed her hands and began to tie them together with some nylon rope, and once her hands were secure, he seized her legs and did the same. Jeffy was terrified he would find the phone. As long as she had it, her father could track her. His hands moved quickly, wrapping the rope several times around her legs and ankles, and suddenly he stopped. "What have we here?" Jeffy closed her eyes, her heart taking a dive. He pushed her sock down and removed the phone. "I think I'll hold on to that," he said. Jeffy watched as he pocketed her phone, and she gave thanks that he hadn't tossed it aside or handed it to Mr. Daly. The man spoke briefly to Mr. Daly. Jeffy couldn't hear what they said except the last part where he assured Mr. Daly no one would discover the girl in his trunk. He then produced a white cloth and placed it over Jeffy's nose. She bucked and fought, trying not to breathe in the sickening sweet smell. She knew exactly what it was. Trichloromethane and methyl trichloride, commonly known as chloroform. New scene. Talman watched them drive away. His anger was palpable. The little thief had probably been looking for money, yet why would she use his computer? It didn't make any sense. He wandered into the dining room, eyeing the remainder of the breakfast dishes with disdain. He hated when things didn't go as planned, and especially when things were out of order. Unable to stand the mess, he cleared the table of the dishes, polished the wood, replaced the centerpiece, then stood back and admired his work. He'd barely gotten back to his office before there was a knock at the front door. He opened it to Agent Dodge and Agent Stevens and an army of others. "What is going on?" he blustered. "Senator Daly, we have a warrant to search the premises." "On what grounds? This is absurd. I'll have your badge for this. I'm a United States Senator. You can't just come bursting into my home." "Yes, sir, with a warrant, I can." Agent Dodge motioned, and several agents stormed the house. "You people are in big trouble." "Let me see the warrant," he demanded. The agent handed papers to him, and Daly read them, his face turning a bright red. "This is absurd. This is ridiculous. Fraud? Kidnapping? Oh, there's more. That's all we could get this morning. We were in a hurry." Men began walking out the door with files and computers. Some headed up the stairs. "Let's step into a room and have a chat," Agent Dodge said. "I believe I'll call my attorney first," Talman answered, his voice not quite as forceful as before. Two agents approached Agent Dodge. "We've searched the house, sir." "She's not here." Dodge pinned Daly with an icy stare. "You want to tell me what you did with the girl?" "What girl? I have no idea what you're talking about." "The young girl, the one who was a friend of your daughter. Where is she?" "That little tramp? Is that what this is all about?" "Did she call you?" he asked, thinking of the phone Kurt had found on her. "I don't know what she told you, but she broke into my house. I should have pressed charges, but instead, I sent her on her way. I told her to go home. That's what I get for being a nice guy. That little brat is who you should be questioning." "Well, we'd like to question her, if we could find her." "I have no idea where she went. I kicked her out of my home and told her to make sure she doesn't come back." "How do you even know about her? Did she call you? Or maybe it was my daughter who called you. Who was it?" he demanded. Because if it was Marissa, he would take great satisfaction in beating his youngest daughter to a pulp. Apparently, Mackenzie had been a greater influence on her than he thought. The young lady in question called her parents and said you had her locked up in this house somewhere. The agent watched as Daly's face visibly paled. Talman cursed himself inwardly for not being more careful. The little brat had gotten to him. She'd flustered him. She'd actually kicked him. He hadn't even thought of her having a cell phone on her. "This is all quite absurd," Talman said. "You keep saying that. The funny thing is, I'm going to have to agree. I sent that little brat on her way. I had my man take her home." Your story just changed." Talman sneered at the agent. "I have no idea what you're talking about. A few minutes ago, you said you kicked her out of your house, but now it seems you had her escorted home." "I doubt that." "Don't you dare question my word. It could be fatal to your career." "What's his name and number?" "Whose name and number?" "Your man, Senator. You said you had your man take her home. I'm going to need his name and phone number." Huffing out a breath, Daly gave him the information. Agent Dodge dialed immediately. The call went to message. "He doesn't answer, Senator. Have you spoken to your man recently?" "As a matter of fact, I have." "And where did he take the girl?" "She refused to tell him where she lived, and so he took her to the school where he dropped her off. If you find her, I believe I've just decided I will be filing a complaint against her." "If we find her? You mean when, right? When we find her. And let me fill you in on some information, Senator. You'd better hope we find her, because that little girl is the daughter of Eric Keno. And if anything happens to her, it will be all we can do to keep him from killing you." "Eric Keno?" "Yes, you know. Ricky Keno's father. Does that answer your question?" New scene. Mickey was pacing the Keno's living room, her bag packed with the few possessions she had. She turned to Mark, who'd also packed a bag for himself and little Joey. "Why? Why do you think we've suddenly been summoned to Seattle? Do you think it's because everything is over? Do you think it's because they found Jeffy? Or maybe it's because something's happened to Marissa. Maybe she's—" "Mickey, please calm down. Ricky will be here any minute and we'll know the answers. Until then, why borrow trouble? You wanted to go, and now we're going. We'll know why in just a minute, Mark said calmly. Mickey stopped and nodded. Of course, you're right. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm just so worried. Well, that's understandable. I am too. Take a deep breath or two. We were about to have a prayer. Would you like to join us? She nodded, and they bowed their heads and prayed for Jeffy's safety. And near the end of the prayer, Mark also asked for Mickey's healing. In Jesus' name, amen, he ended. Mickey looked up with tears in her eyes and smiled at Mark and mumbled a soft, thank you. He nodded. Picture the best possible outcome and focus on that, okay? She closed her eyes and drew in a deep breath. Okay, she said softly. Okay. Sorry I'm being so hard to deal with right now. Mark smiled. Did it seem like I was having any trouble dealing with you? She gave a slight chuckle. No, none whatsoever. Ricky and Bree came bursting in the house with their kids. Ricky was not the jovial, happy man she'd met a few days ago. Bree had obviously been crying, and Ricky's eyes met Mickey's. I'm sorry, she whispered. It's all my fault. He came to her and took her hand. How do you see that? Jeffy and I talked. I told her she reminded me of my little sister. I told her how much I miss Marissa and how worried I was about her, thinking I was in captivity or dead, and I said I wished I could somehow get word to her. Ricky sighed. It's not your fault. Jeffy is completely responsible for her own actions. She shook her head. That's the same thing Jeff said, but Ricky, she's just a child. I influenced her. Jeffy is not just a child, Ricky argued. He looked at Mark. Are you ready? Mark nodded and grabbed his bag and Mickey's bags. Joey, he yelled. The little boy came immediately down the stairs. He was quiet, as were Eric and Taylor. Get in the car, kiddos, Ricky ordered. They quickly obeyed. So why do I get to come now, when a few hours ago I had to stay here? Mickey asked. Things have changed, Ricky answered. The feds decided to stop handling the senator with kid gloves while they tried to put together a case against him. Thanks to Jeffy's stunt, they've launched an outright investigation, and they'll need your statements. So your well-being is extremely important. They want you close at hand, and Jason has promised them he'll deliver you safe and sound. I'm so relieved. I was going crazy. I need to be there. We all need to be there, Bree said. I know Jeffy is going to be just fine. I just know it. But staying home and waiting for word about her is beyond my capabilities. So we're all going. Thank goodness. If only we'd known this a few hours ago, Jeff and I might still be together. Ricky's eyebrows rose. The two of you broke up? She shrugged. I think so. Ricky's eyes met Mark's. The younger man slowly shook his head. Ricky raised his eyebrows at Mickey, waiting for her explanation. She huffed out an indignant breath. I can't be with a man who thinks he can order me around. Let me guess, Bree said. You wanted to go, and he insisted you stay, and he won. Yes, Bree smiled. And now you're not speaking to him. Never again. Ricky pinned his wife with a stare, and she raised her eyebrows at him, and he shook his head at her and spoke to Mickey. I'm sure he was trying to do what he thought was best at the time, and probably also following Jason's orders, he said. I don't want to talk about it anymore, Mickey said, arching her brows defiantly, even though what Ricky said was absolutely correct. She changed the subject. Anyway, there is a problem. I have no ID with me in order to fly. Well, that's okay. We're chartering a jet. Jason has 3 company jets, but one is in New York, one is in Saudi Arabia, and one is on its way to Seattle with our family aboard, Ricky explained. So it's a charter for us. He motioned toward the door. No more conversation. Let's go. Mickey nodded and rushed out the door. New scene. Kimmy listened as her mother spoke on the phone to her closest friend, Shelley Keno. Something was terribly wrong, and it had to do with Jeffy. Her mom was crying and trying to console Shelley over the phone, and it sounded like they were saying that Jeffy was missing, but Kimmy knew exactly where Jeffy was. Well, not exactly, but she did know Jeffy was in Seattle. She'd promised not to tell, though now she knew she'd have to break that promise. Most days, Kimmy's dad would be at the office, but it was Saturday morning, and he was working from home. Nervously, Kimmy walked through to the west wing of their sprawling mansion and entered her father's office. He was speaking to someone on his headset as his hands flew over a keyboard. A red light flashed on a map Another phone was ringing. It sounded as if her father was on the phone with the FBI, Kimmy thought, because he'd used the words special agent. Dad, Kimmy said softly. He spun, eyed her, held his finger up, meaning just a minute, and went back to his conversation. He was giving directions, saying something about a back mountain road, arguing, and finally he punched a button to end the call. He turned to her, and the worry on his face had Kimmy's stomach churning. Kim, her father said softly, I need to tell you something. It's about Jeffy. Kimmy nodded. Me too, Daddy, she said. I'm sorry, Dad. I know Jeffy's missing. I know where she is. She's in Seattle. Jason's eyebrows arched. Yes, I know. You do? Yes, I do, he said slowly. The question is, how do you know? Kimmy chewed on her lip for just a second. She told me. Her father's face darkened considerably. When did she tell you? Yesterday. Did you know she went there without her parents' permission? Kimmy nodded her head. And you kept her secret? I promised her I wouldn't tell. Jason closed his eyes and shook his head. Kimmy looked up hopefully. Is she okay? We don't know, Kimmy. She's in trouble. She's in the hands of some criminals, and they've taken her off somewhere, and we can't find her. Not yet, anyway. Kimmy's hands flew to her face, and tears welled in her eyes. Oh, no, Daddy, you have to help her. You have to. She ran to him and buried her face against her father's chest. He held her and stroked her long, dark hair. Okay now, Kim. I'm working on it, honey. She sniffed and lifted her head as the tears continued to fall. You always save everybody, Daddy. You always win. You have to win this time. You have to. You have to save Jeffy. You can't let anything happen to her. His daughter's words pierced his heart, and it took Jason a moment to clear his throat. I'm doing my best. It's all my fault. I should have told. I should have. Well, you were keeping a promise to a friend. You were being loyal. I understand that. It's not your fault, Lil' Kim. The phone rang. Now, I have to get back to work. You don't leave the house. You got it? Why not? Because I may need you, so stay close. And I need to know you're safe so I can concentrate. She nodded. I'll do anything to help. I know you will, Kimmy. He kissed her head and set her away. New scene. When his cell phone rang, Kurt reached into his pocket but pulled Jeffy's cell phone out instead of his own. Cursing, he tossed it aside, reached back in, and grabbed his own phone. He didn't recognize the number and so decided to not answer. The second time it rang, it was his boss. Yes, he said, doing his best to hide the resentment he felt for the man. Listen carefully. I don't have much time. The feds are here. They've taken all my files and my PC. They won't find anything optioning. They want you to go downtown with them for questioning. The phone rings. The dog barks. The truck arrives. Okay. They want me to go down with them for questioning. Well, the crap is about to hit the fan, Kurt moaned. No, you have to stay calm. Don't blow this. They have nothing. As it turns out, this... S'mores, hush! As it turns out, this Jeff Davis is still in good standing at Ameritech, and Mackenzie is in their custody, accusing me of kidnapping her. Damn. There's no proof. S'mores, hush. S'mores. Quiet. Darn it. There's proof that I knew where the cabin is. Davis saw me heading there. And are you forgetting that I met with this guy and made arrangements with him to deliver proceeds from the arms deal? You driving toward that cabin is hardly a crime and only circumstantial. I will explain the meeting you had with Davis as my own ploy to get a crooked agent to bring back my daughter. Keep your mouth shut, Kurt. I don't need to remind you how bad things can get. Kurt's jaw tensed. No, you don't. The real problem is that little brat you have in your trunk. It seems she's not some two-bit kid off the street. Her real name is Juneflower Keno, as in Eric Keno's daughter, Ricky Keno's kid sister. Kurt cursed. Somehow, someway, she knows something. What makes you think that? It was something she said when she was in my office. Bottom line, she doesn't survive. We've already decided that, so why the call? Because she's not some two-bit kid that nobody's going to miss. She's a kid of a celebrity, and they'll leave no stone unturned, so make sure you leave no evidence. Clean the area well. I already have 2 eyewitnesses who'll say they saw you drop her off near the school. Make it look like some lowlife got her. Got it, Kurt said. He scowled as he hung up, his temper exploding. He threw his cell phone so hard it broke into pieces against the windshield. Kurt swore. How had he let a guy like Daly take over his life? It had gone on too long, and now there was no way out. Not that Kurt could see. Kurt himself was no innocent puppet, not anymore. He'd done his share of bad deeds and gloried in the spoils more than once. He had no qualms offing this smart aleck kid, and he would, because he was told to do it. Still, he could almost feel the walls closing in around him. New scene. Who was that? Agent Stevens asked his partner as he slumped down in a chair in his small office, going over the stack of statements he'd already collected. That was Jason Lee, the guy who owns Ameritech Security. He's convinced that the Keno girl is being transported west into the mountains. He says he has a new kind of GPS-type tracker in her cell phone. Our tracker gave a weak signal for a few minutes and then stopped completely. He says he has a clear signal which has her headed west about 2 hours from here. The problem is, I told him we have 2 witnesses who saw the kid dropped off at the school. Nevertheless, he insists she's in a car and headed out west. He shook his head. You know, Daly asked if the Keno girl was the one who called us. That makes me think he believed she was alive and well. So just maybe he actually did have this guy drop her off. Ah, he's smart. And why can't we locate this Kurt Wells guy? We know the guy intended to off his stepdaughter, so I believe he's lying. So we go after the kid? Yeah. Her family just landed at the airport. We pick them up and head west. New scene. Mickey realized she'd been chewing on her fingernails and forced herself to stop. The thought that she could be the cause of something terrible happening to Jeffy tore her up. And what about Marissa? Was she okay? What had Talman done? She knew what he was capable of, but surely he wouldn't hurt Marissa or an outsider like Jeffy. He wasn't that stupid, was he? Mickey glanced over at Bree. Her daughter sat in her lap as Bree tried to keep her entertained by reading a book. Mark's son, Joey, was sitting next to his Uncle Ricky on the floor of the jet, their legs crossed, their eyes closed, their upturned hands on their knees, apparently in deep meditation. Ricky's son, Eric, was playing a video game with Mark. Sighing, Mickey looked back out the window, her mind going over and over the crazy events that had taken place over the past few weeks of her life. It all seemed so surreal. You feeling a little displaced? Startled at the voice, Mickey turned to find Bree smiling at her. That is exactly how I'm feeling. Bree nodded. With everything that's happened, it's no wonder. Mickey eyed her. The book was gone. Little Taylor sat quietly eating a banana. You sound so calm. Aren't you worried about Jeffy? Sure, I'm worried, but somehow I have a feeling she's going to be okay. I have to believe that anyway. Therefore, I will act as if that's fact. Mickey nodded. You and your entire family have some interesting philosophies on how to go through life. Bree smiled. I didn't always, but Ricky is a huge influence on me. He keeps me calm, and I suppose when he gets upset, I keep him calm. We believe God is very active in our lives, and if we're going to integrate that into our lives, we need to show our trust in Him. Integrate? So, you mean you can't profess to believe in God and then when something goes wrong fall all apart? Right. Instead of reacting to certain situations, we try to act. We try to take control and be the author of every event, so to speak. So in my mind, I will write this little episode as ending with a happily event ever after. But what ifs are borrowing trouble and useless? Then again, I may have to do a rewrite. Sighing, Mickey nodded. Bree reached across the aisle and squeezed her hand. Do you think you and Jeff will be able to talk things out? Frowning, Mickey shook her head. Really, the little spat we had wasn't important enough to actually break up over. Not if we truly loved each other. Bree waited, but when she didn't go on, she said the words for her. You're saying maybe you didn't truly love each other. Mickey briefly closed her eyes. I don't know. I mean, we've only known each other a very short time. I've said I love him, and he said he loves me, yet we've both agreed that it's possible that we're just in over our heads with feelings that come from being through a traumatic situation together. You know, like he's my hero, my knight in shining armor, and I'm the female who's brought out his protective tendencies. It could all be false. But what if it's not? Exactly, Mickey whispered. What if? I'm so confused. Having that little spat with him sort of woke me up. It made me realize that I don't really know him at all, and he doesn't really know me, and maybe we should back off, and take things a lot slower. Bree nodded. That sounds logical. Yeah, so why do I feel so miserable when I say it? The chemistry is strong, huh? To put it nicely, Mickey said with a laugh. Sigh. What do you think I should do? Bree glanced at her husband, whose eyes had popped open at the question. She smiled at him. A wise man once told me that he couldn't tell me what I should do, because then I'd have someone to blame when things went wrong. He said I had to make my decisions for myself, and he gave me this advice. Be honest with yourself. Only do what you truly feel is the right thing to do. And what if it turns out you made the wrong choice? Well, then you fix it. New scene. When Kurt stopped, Cameron stopped and slid quickly behind a tree. The old guy was doing pretty good, considering he was carrying maybe 110 pounds over his shoulder. Cam was having no problem keeping up with him. For 2 hours he'd followed the guy. He found it was much harder to follow someone than he thought it would be, especially when you were trying to keep your distance. They'd headed west out the state highway into the foothills. Just before they'd hit the town of Gold Bar, Kurt had swung north toward the pass, then turned left again at a road that was barely a road. From there, they'd turned so many times, Cam wasn't sure he could find his way out. He had always had a terrible sense of direction. At one point, Kurt had slowed almost to a stop, and Cam had to pull over quickly. It looked as if the guy threw something out the window, then kept going. Once on foot, they moved through the dense forest. So dense, at times, it was hard to tell it was daytime. Now, Kurt was doing this zigzag and circle stuff, and Cameron was pretty sure he'd passed this particular fallen tree at least once, maybe twice before. With each zig and zag, Cameron was getting closer. He couldn't just charge him because the dude had a gun in his suit pocket. He knew, because Cameron had seen him pull it out twice now. He wondered how much farther into the forest they would go. He was pretty sure they'd been at it for over an hour. He peeked around the tree, apparently finished resting. Kurt picked up his bundle, which was wrapped in a green blanket, and hauled her over his shoulder and started again. Cameron fell in step. It seemed they'd walked forever when Kurt stopped again, lowering Jeffy to the ground. He was panting, trying to catch his breath. Cameron watched as this time the man knelt beside her and unwrapped her from the blanket. Cam's heart practically jumped out of his throat at the sight of Jeffy, bound with rope, her eyes closed. She moaned and tossed her head. You waking up, little girl? Kurt muttered. Well, we can't have that, can we? He produced a white cloth and a bottle and poured something on the cloth and held it to her face for a minute. Jeffy kicked a few times before she fell limp. Cameron slipped a little closer as Kurt concentrated on untying the ropes that bound her wrists and ankles. And once Kurt finished with that, he removed her shoes and socks. Cameron moved closer still, his heart racing, when Kurt looked up suddenly, his eyes scanning the forest. Cam forced his breathing to slow, forced his body to be completely still. Finally, Kurt turned his attention back to Jeffy. He grabbed the hem of her shirt and pulled it over her head, then removed her bra. Good Lord. Did he plan to rape her? Cameron swore he wouldn't let it happen. He inched closer, then ducked behind a tree that was large enough to hide his body and was only maybe 20 feet from them. Kurt unbuttoned Jeffy's jeans and pulled both them and her underwear off at the same time. Cameron almost lost it. He decided to charge, but Kurt pulled the gun and spun around. Cameron remained where he was, safely hidden. Getting himself killed wouldn't help Jeffy. He had to use his brain. Pinking around the tree, he saw Kurt scan the forest. Then finally relaxing, he tossed the gun down onto the blanket. Cam watched as Kurt rolled Jeffy off the blanket to lie face down on the forest floor and then pulled her hands out straight. Next, he moved behind her and spread her legs apart, and bile rose at the sight of Kurt's hands on Jeffy's body. And then Cameron finally understood Kurt wasn't going to rape her. He was positioning her for death, staging the scene. Realizing what the next step would be, Cameron charged. Kurt looked up at the sound, reached for his gun, but Cameron was on him too fast. Cameron plowed into him with every bit of force he could put behind it, and being a defensive back, that was considerable. Kurt landed with a grunt on his back, with Cameron on top of him, and before the man could even gain his wind, Cameron was pummeling him with his fist. Kurt wasn't fighting back, mostly because he couldn't. It was taking all he had to try and keep the kid from breaking his nose. There was no stopping Cameron. He swung until Kurt stopped moving, and when Cam finally pushed himself away and stood, the man was completely unconscious. Breathing hard, his hands covered with blood, Cam pulled Kurt over to the nearest tree, grabbed the rope that had been used to bind Jeffy, and secured him to the tree. Next, he knelt beside Jeffy and gently turned her over onto her back. "Jeffy," he said softly. "Can you hear me, Jeffy?" He watched her, making sure she was breathing, then in relief simply hugged her to him. He had no idea how long he stayed in that position, cradling Jeffy's body, rocking her back and forth, giving thanks that she was alive. But he knew he had to get moving. Daylight was burning, and he didn't want to be this deep in the woods at night. He was going to have to carry her. He grabbed her shirt, and tried to get it on her, but her body was so limp, he gave up. Instead, he merely tucked her shirt and jeans and shoes around her and wrapped her up in the blanket. The gun he stuffed in his waistband. Then he went to Kurt and searched his pockets. All he found were car keys, which he took, a wallet, which he left, and the stuff he'd seen him use on Jeffy. Pouring some into the cloth, he held it to Kurt's nose, figuring it would be best to keep him unconscious as long as possible. Before he hoisted Jeffy up, he dug in his pocket for his cell phone to call Marissa and let her know that Jeffy was okay. But it wasn't there. Frantically, he searched all his pockets, then realized when he'd spoken to Marissa earlier, he tossed the phone onto the passenger seat of his car. Great. Just freaking great. He looked down at the young girl whom he had quickly and easily come to care very much about, and brushed a few leaves from her face. "Don't worry, Jeffy. I'll get us out of here." With that, he hoisted her over his shoulder and started walking. New scene. The elation that came when they found the dark blue Buick quickly faded when they discovered Jeffy's phone in the front seat. From here on out, they'd have to track them. The feds had called for dogs, but Eric and Shelley had no intention of waiting around until the dogs arrived. It was getting late. Choppers were also called, yet they'd been told that they wouldn't be much help due to the denseness of the forest. Jeff and Joey took point since they were armed. The rest spread out behind them. Agent Stevens stayed behind to wait for the dogs. The group had been searching the woods for over an hour when Agent Dodge received communication from Stevens. First thing he told them was they'd found another car a few hundred yards further down the road. They'd know the owner soon. Then he let them know that they had 2 bloodhounds and that, using the driver's seat in the Buick, they'd picked up a scent and were headed south. Agent Dodge and the Kenos adjusted, turning south. They headed that direction for more than 30 minutes when they met up with the dogs, who were now headed north, in the direction the Kenos had just come from. They adjusted their direction again, and when they got to a point where the dogs seemed to lose the trail for a minute, Shelley began to panic. It was when they changed direction a third time that she completely broke down, and Eric was quickly at her side. "He's leading us on a wild goose chase," she cried. "I want my daughter." "I know, Shelley. We're going to find her." He walked a zigzag pattern, trying to throw us off, but it took him time to walk that pattern. Eventually, we'll catch up to them. He's going to expect us to get frustrated and give up trying to follow his pattern. He will eventually break away. He can't keep it up forever. You have to be strong. Don't give up. She shook her head. "I won't give up, Eric. Just tell me, please. Tell me you think she's alive." "I do, Shelley. I think she's alive." "Do you need to rest, or do we keep going?" No rest. We keep going," Shelley said firmly. "That's my girl," Eric said, giving her a quick hug. New scene. He was lost. Leaning against a tree, the sweat pouring from his body, he closed his eyes. He was lost. He'd been walking for hours. When he first realized he should already be out of the woods, he hadn't panicked. He'd taken a deep breath, looked up at the sky, and tried to judge which way was east or west. But the trees were too thick, and it was hard to see the sun, and harder still to figure out which way it was headed, since it seemed to be at a different angle each time he looked up. He thought he'd been so smart when he came to the stream and began following it. It had to lead down, right? down to a town, or at least out of the mountains, and then he'd come to a point where on his side of the stream he'd have to climb down a steep cliff. So he'd cross the small river, no small task with Jeffy in tow, and continued on from there. Now he came to another place where there was a deep, steep drop-off, this time on both sides, and realizing he was going to have to backtrack for miles to continue following the water, he began to question the wisdom of it at all. The only thing the sun was telling him now is that it was going down. His attention was drawn by the soft moan at his feet. Kneeling down beside Jeffy, he brushed his hand over her cheek. "Jeffy, wake up, baby." Her only answer was to moan again and move her head. Thank goodness, he thought, she's coming around. To help things along, he reached inside the blanket, grabbed her tank top, and rushed down to the creek. Taking a moment to wash the blood from his hands and to drink some water himself, he then plunged Jeffy's shirt into the cold water, wrung it out, and went to her. He wiped her face and neck as she began to stir. He hurried back to the stream and rinsed out the shirt, and this time didn't quite wring it out all the way, and kneeling down next to Jeffy, he twisted the material and let the cool water drip into her mouth. To his delight, she swallowed and licked her lips. "There you go, Jeffy. Better, huh?" He stroked her face gently, and she moaned. "More water," she whispered. He immediately complied, getting emotional at the sound of her voice. He watched her tongue flick out to lick at the moisture, and then her eyes fluttered open. He smiled at her. "Hi." She smiled back. "Cameron?" "Yeah, it's me." "What happened?" "Long story short, I followed you. Kurt tried to off you. I beat him up pretty good and tied him to a tree. And now, well, now we're trying to find our way out of the forest. However, I seem to be hopelessly lost." She gave a soft laugh. "My hero." "Yeah, some hero. It's getting late. We're probably going to wander around in the mountains until we either starve to death or get eaten by a bear." She shivered, and he sat and pulled her into his lap, pulling the blanket tighter around her, holding her close against his chest. She reveled in the heat, the beat of his heart, and the warmth of his body. "It's a lot colder up here in Seattle than it is in L.A., she said, and the warmth of his body. "It's a lot colder up here in Seattle than it is in L.A., she said, her voice barely audible. "Yeah, it may be summer, but it's always chilly up here in the mountains, especially when the sun is blocked." "The man, you said his name is Kurt?" "Yeah, he works for Rissa's dad. He's a jerk." "He tried to kill me?" "Well, I don't know for sure, but it looked to me like he was posing you. He had a gun, and he was positioning you on the ground, and for some reason it seemed to me like the next thing he was going to do is pick that gun up and shoot you in the back of the head." "Why did you think he was going to do that?" "Well, just instinct. I couldn't the reason for him to be positioning your body like he was. I was afraid to wait any longer to see what he might do, because I knew once he picked that gun back up, I wouldn't be able to move fast enough to stop him. So I charged in and took him out." "Thank you, Cam," she mumbled, her voice still weak. "I guess we'd better get moving," he finally said. Jeffy shook her head. "No, we stay put." "But my father's looking for me. He'll find me." "How do you know?" "Because I know my dad." "Okay, but how will he find you?" "A tracking system in my cell phone. The guy, Kurt, he took my phone, but they'll at least be able to track us out here. I I don't suppose you could find your way back to him." Cameron sighed. "I doubt it." "Listen, I checked his pockets. Your phone wasn't on him." She frowned and looked up. "Well, then it's in the car. How far are we from the car?" "I don't know. Could be miles. Could be a few yards." He shook his head. "I'm sorry, Jeffy. A terrible sense of direction." She snuggled against him. "It's okay. My father will find me. It's getting dark, so it may not be until morning, but he will find us. Don't worry." "I'm too busy being happy you're alive right now to worry about anything." She groaned. "I'm dizzy and nauseated." Her eyes fluttered closed. "That freak put some stuff on a rag and held it over your face." "Yeah, chloroform. It was used years ago as an anesthetic during surgery. And then they found it can cause kidney damage and other things, and they stopped using it." He grinned down at her. "Right. Doing it again, huh?" she asked without opening her eyes. "It's okay. You wouldn't happen to have some matches on you?" "Unfortunately, no." "Well, then, I guess you're going to have to keep me warm tonight in other ways," she sighed. His gut clenched. "You just work on feeling better right now, okay?" he said. She snuggled down into the blanket. Then her eyes flew open. "Am I naked?" "Yes." "What? Did he? No. He took your clothes off, like I said. I think he was trying to make it look like someone had raped and murdered you. I never bothered to dress you because I just wanted to get out of here. And also because you were limp as a noodle. I brought your clothes. They're stuffed down there in the blanket somewhere. Pulling the blanket away, she looked for her clothes. She found the jeans and one shoe. They stood together, shook the blanket out completely, but found nothing else. Cameron sighed as his eyes glided over her supple, perfect body. I didn't think to grab your underwear and socks, but I know I had both shoes. One must have fallen out. Anyway, you have your jeans, but, I used your shirt to wipe your face and bring you water. He quickly pulled his own shirt over his head. Here, he said, helping to dress her. The Madison High School t-shirt came to mid-thigh to dress her. The Madison High School t-shirt came to mid-thigh. She smiled up at him. Thanks. He held her jeans out to her. No, I think I'll just stay in this during the night so I can be comfortable. She put a hand to her head. I'm still dizzy. I think I'd better lie down. Cameron spread the blanket out on the ground and helped her to get comfortable, then sat down beside her, and she looked up at him. Thanks, Cameron, for everything. He touched her face and shook his head. You could be dead right now. If I hadn't decided to stay and wait for you, if I hadn't been able to follow you, you'd be dead. I'm sure glad you decided to wait. I don't want to be dead, and just the thought of the pain I would have caused my family. Oh, man, that's a bad thought, so I won't dwell on it. I'll just stick with gratitude that you waited for me. It's because, after last night I was feeling close to you. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. I was feeling close to you, too. Last night, it was amazing. Yeah, it was. And what I'm trying to say, Jeffy, is if we hadn't done what we did last night, I may have just dropped you off and waved goodbye, and that would have been the last time I saw you alive. Well, my father says playing what if is a waste of time and only serves to create fear. Your father is a wise man. I've actually heard him speak before at Washington State at a youth conference. That was 2 years ago. I never dreamed I'd be sitting beside his daughter one day thinking about the makeout session we had. Jeffy giggled, then shimmered. Cameron, will you hold me? I'm so cold. It must be another side effect of the chloroform. He stretched out beside her and pulled the other half of the blanket over both of them. She snuggled up into his arms. Ah, that's better already. He kissed her forehead. New scene. Once in Seattle, Mickey found that she would be left behind again. Apparently, Ricky had been instructed to drop her off at her own home, where 2 Ameritech agents were waiting to take over her protection. This time, she didn't argue for 2 reasons. 1, she knew she would be no help traipsing through the woods searching for Jeffy, and 2, she developed a little plan of her own. Her home was located on the north side of the city in a trendy neighborhood known as the Avenues. She hadn't been prepared for the jolt that hit her as she approached the small, craftsman-like dwelling. The last time she stood on the walk outside her front door, she'd been on her way for an early morning jog. It had only been a few weeks since that fateful morning, but it seemed like it had been years. She wandered through the house in a daze. The cops or feds had been here, she surmised, since the place had been dusted for fingerprints and the black dust was everywhere. Her computer was gone, and she made a mental note to ask about it. Mickey? She looked up at Jack, the agent who'd come to the motel that first night with Jeff. You okay? She blinked, not sure if her emotions were in control enough to speak. I know it's a mess, Jack said, but there are companies you can hire who will clean it all up for you, or you can do it yourself. It will come up. I'd be happy to help you with it. She looked up at the large man who looked so deadly and spoke so gently. Jack, you must be one of the nicest men I've ever met. She looked at the other agent when he let out a snort. But no, she continued, it's not the mess. It's just that it almost doesn't feel like home anymore. I feel like I'm in a stranger's house. He nodded. I understand. Facing death gives us a different perspective on everything. Fresh eyes, I like to say. Sometimes it has a way of making us feel out of place, between dimensions. Maybe when Jeff gets back, you can... Don't mention him to me, please. Jack glanced at Nathaniel's fellow agent. But I thought... Me too. Apparently I was wrong. I find him to be a pig-headed jerk who was only concerned with being the big man hero thing. Jack used every ounce of will to control his smile. She couldn't have spoken more loving words. He covered by frowning deeply. Well, maybe once you two get to talk about things, it will be better. Mickey smiled at him. You're a very nice man, Jack, but I don't think that's going to happen, and I'd appreciate it if you don't talk about it anymore. Jack gave a nod of his head. Whatever you say. Still, I just want you to know that if you want, I'd be happy to tell him off for you. Agent Nathaniel Hawk choked, then coughed, covering his mouth with his fist. Mickey turned her gaze on him. Sorry, allergies. She breathed a sigh. I'm just going to change clothes, grab my purse, and I'll be right down. I want to go to my mother's house to see my sister. 30 minutes later, Mickey stood nervously on the steps of the Daly home. She was accompanied by Jack and Nathaniel. Her stepfather was being questioned by the FBI at the present time, which left the coast clear for Mickey. The media had been mulling around trying to get a story, and when they saw her, they made a beeline but were stopped abruptly in their tracks by Jack and Nathaniel. It was Miss Dora who opened the door, and her hands flew to her face. Oh, Mickey, she cried, clutching Mickey and pulling her into the house. The agent stepped in behind her, closing and locking the door. Oh, dear Lord, the woman exclaimed. Miss Marion, come quick. Marissa. Dora threw her arms around Mickey, blubbering and crying and thanking God all at the same time. We thought you would never come back. We thought you were dead for sure. Mickey pulled her away and smiled. Oh, you can't get rid of me. Oh, you can't get rid of me that easily. Marion came hurrying from the den. She stopped, her mouth agape. Mickey? Yes, Mom, it's me. The woman moved slowly, much slower than Mickey was used to seeing her move. Her hands shook as she placed her arms around Mickey and hugged her tightly. She couldn't remember the last time her mother had actually hugged her. Maybe when she'd left for college. Mickey looked up at the sound of loud clumping coming down the steps. Her mother moved away and Mickey opened her eyes. Marissa jumped onto her, almost knocking her down. If Jack hadn't braced her, they both would have gone tumbling to the floor. Oh, Mick, I'm so happy to see you. I was so worried, and then Jeffy came and told me you were alive, but now... Wait, Marion said. You knew she was alive? As of yesterday, Jeffy told me. Who's Jeffy? My friend who visited me. Oh, I told you her name was Chris, but really it was Jeffy Keno. How did this Jeffy know Mickey was alive? Mickey ignored her mother's sudden interrogation of her sister. Rissa, you have news of Jeffy at all? Nothing yet. I'm so worried about her. Me too. Well, maybe the two of you need to have a seat and tell me what's going on, Marion said sternly. Mickey's chin rose into the air, letting her mother know that there was no way she would ever be able to intimidate her again. Still, her mother was right. They needed to talk. Fine. Come sit down, Mom, and we'll tell you everything, Mickey said. You too, Dora. I don't think I can sit right now. The senator will be coming home soon, and I doubt that, Jack said. This is Agent Jack Crandall and Agent Nathaniel Hawk, Mickey said quickly. Agents? You're with the FBI? Oh, no, Mrs. Daly. Much better than that. We're with Ameritech Security. We're here to make sure Miss Daly stays safe, since she'll be the principal witness against your husband, Jack said. What? How dare you come into my home and say that? Mickey smiled at Jack. Maybe he wasn't quite as sweet as she'd originally thought. The remark was a well-placed barb. Apparently, something in her mother's mannerisms had displeased Jack. Come sit down. I'll fill you in, Mickey said. New scene. They'd hoped Jeffy would have been found before they arrived in Seattle, but apparently it was not to be. Bree and the kids were shipped off to a hotel where she took rooms for the family. Ricky and Mark hightailed it westward to the mountains with packs filled with supplies to help with the search. They carried things that Eric hadn't had with him, not expecting a wilderness search for his daughter. Things like flashlights, hunting knives, blankets, protein bars, water, and night vision goggles. Communicating with Joey, they were able to quickly catch up to the search party before dusk. Only a brief moment was taken for hugs and words of encouragement. Water and nourishment was dispersed to be consumed as they walked. They walked steadily for another hour before the dogs began to whimper and speed up. Excitement and anxiety collided as they realized the scent the dogs had been tracking was getting stronger. It was full dark when they came upon the man, tied to a tree. He was awake and moaning. No sympathy was shown for his battered and bloody face. He was untied from the tree, given water, cuffed, and pushed down to sit on a nearby log. Where's Jeffy? Joey asked. I don't know who you're talking about, Kurt answered. Geez, the man is an idiot, Ricky said softly. He turned to watch his father, ready to grab him and hold him back if necessary. Ricky's eyes met Mark's and Joey's and realized they were thinking the same thing. Yet Eric appeared to be as calm as he always is. He also appeared to be in deep thought. It was Shelley who moved forward. She knelt down beside him. Listen to me carefully. Jeffy is my daughter. We know you brought her out here, and yet she's not here with you, and finding you in the condition you're in, I surmise someone was not happy with you. Whoever that was tied you to a tree and took my daughter. Now, I'm asking you nicely, where is she? When the man didn't answer, Shelley looked up toward her husband, and Eric nodded at her and knelt down next to her. Shelley, I'm thinking it wasn't anyone who took her. I'm thinking Jeffy did this to him. That's why he won't talk. He's embarrassed that he was bested by a young girl. She's probably trying to find her way out of the forest right now. It shouldn't take us too long to locate her. That little brat could never best me. Well, it appears she has. It was the kid. The kid? Marissa's friend, the Wallace kid. Eric smiled. Ricky rolled his eyes. The man really was an idiot. Eric looked up at Agent Stevens. Before you take him in, I'd like a word with him alone. I don't think that would be a good idea. Just a few words, I promise. I won't harm him. I admit, I thought about ripping his heart out, but it was just for a split second. If I wanted him dead, he would be already. Just a few words, man to man. Against his better judgment, Agent Stevens nodded. The group moved away, but each person kept a close eye on Eric. Eric looked deep into the man's eyes. I know you brought her out here to kill her. When Kurt started to deny, Eric shook his head. I'm not asking you to confirm. I already know. And in order for someone to do what you plan to do, I assume you've killed before. He stopped and watched the man's face closely. Kurt remained silent. Eric nodded. That's what I thought. So I know you've killed Daly. For Daly. I'm told you've been with him more than 20 years. Eric shook his head and sighed dramatically. Hell of a life, huh? Doing the dirty work for Senator Daly. I guess when you have enough respect for a man, you do anything for him. Kurt made a short, choking noise. Eric nodded again. So, there is no love between the two of you. Then it must have been for the money. Daly must have made you a rich man, huh? Kurt rolled his eyes heavenward. No, not for money, and not out of love or loyalty to the man you work for. There is only one answer then. Kurt remained silent, and Eric watched him closely. I'm not a cop. I'm merely a man of honor. This conversation is only between you and me. No answer. Eric shrugged. That's okay. You don't have to answer. The answer is simple. I know why you've done what you've done. I don't think there is pure evil in you, so I don't think you committed murder, amongst other things, just because you wanted to see someone suffer, or you're hardened. Oh, you're hardened, all right, to life and to feelings. And you have a temper, that's obvious. Still, that's not why you've done what you've done. I know the answer. Just keep in mind that there was always a choice. Always. Eric stood and nodded at the agents. Let's find my daughter. Agent Dodge nodded as he finished punching buttons on his phone. He held it out to the group. This is the kid that's with Jeffy. He's the one who drove Marissa in to see me one morning. He's a good kid. I don't know how he's involved or came to be out here, but if he has Jeffy, then I believe she's safe. As safe as one can be wandering around in the mountain wilderness in the middle of the night with no food, water, shelter, or protection, Shelley added. Dodge nodded and sighed. Yeah, as safe as one can be. While Joey walked around the area, Jeff spoke with the Keno family, and Agent Dodge finished up with Wells. Joey cursed softly, gaining everyone's swift attention. Jeff, Eric, Ricky, Mark, and Shelley all moved to where Joey was kneeling on the other side of the small clearing. Joey lifted some light-colored items from the ground and held them out. Eric took them from his hands, his eyes closed in pain, his hands balled into fists, and Shelley recognized the items immediately. A long wail came from her throat as she gathered her daughter's bra and panties from her husband. Eric wrapped his arms around her as she sank to the ground. Joey took off. Ricky and Mark scrambled after him, and Agent Dodge jumped in his path, but Joey easily pushed him out of his way. Joey screamed at Wells. I'm going to kill you. You raped a 15-year-old girl? No, the man screamed, cowering, covering his head. I didn't touch her that way, I swear. It was a struggle, but they finally pulled Joey off the already badly beaten man. Ricky had one of Joey's arms twisted behind his back. Mark had the other one. Each had one of Joey's legs scissored between their own. Still, it took Joey several more seconds before he stopped struggling. Kurt finally looked up from the fetal position he'd assumed. I didn't rape her. Then explain these, Shelley demanded, holding up the undergarments. He stopped. What was he going to say? I didn't rape her, but I was about to shoot her in the back of the head? His eyes shuddered, his jaw clamped shut. I didn't rape her. I don't care whether you believe me. He looked up at the FBI agents, letting them know he expected their protection. Jeff ushered the family away and helped them to regroup. Agent Dodge and Officer Langston, whose dogs were Jeffy's lifeline, consulted. It was dark, but they had Jeffy's clothing, and Langston was positive the dogs would be able to pick up a scent. They also had night vision goggles now, and choppers still available, though spotting anything through the dense forest was almost impossible. However, they would circle, looking for a possible campfire. They decided the agents would take Kurt Wells into custody, while Officer Langston, the Kenos, and Jeff would continue the search, at least a little longer. If they didn't come across the kids soon, they would have hundreds of searchers gathered by dawn. And that is the end of chapter 9.